You want to know what it is that makes New Orleans Saints wide receiver Ja'Lynn Polk a potential big deal? I'll tell you what it is that makes Ja'Lynn Polk a potential big deal.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I am your host, your friend, Ross Jackson, New Orleans native, your New Orleans Saints expert and credentialed member of the media covering those New Orleans Saints as a Saints beat writer over at LouisianaSports.net. And on today's episode of Locked On Saints, I'm going to tell you about the big names that got snubbed from combine invites that you need to know. We'll break down why Moliki Matavao has a big opportunity ahead of him in 2026. And I'm going to tell you all the things that make Ja'Lynn Polk, New Orleans Saints wide receiver, a potential big deal going into next season. We got all that and a little bit of lanyap for you on today's episode. We appreciate you very much. Whether it's your first time or your next time, being here with us this time, making us your first listen, and being an everydayer here on the show, which is a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, the #1 sports podcast network, where we are bringing you your team every day. New Orleans Saints wide receiver Ja'Lynn Polk could potentially be a big deal for the team. We broke down yesterday about how it is that he could potentially be a big-time, underrated asset going into 2026. And you know what I learned? Is that you really like hearing about Ja'Lynn Polk. And I thought that was awesome. So I went ahead and I did a deep dive. Shout out to the All Access members that are going to get a whole film study on this going in towards the end of the week here. But I decided to take a little bit of time and really break down the tape on Ja'Lynn Polk, not just from his New England day, a little bit of time in New England, but going back to his Washington skill set and what it is that really put him on the map, because he was the 37th selection in the 2024 NFL draft. And I think people are going to kind of forget about that because the Saints traded a 2027 sixth round pick to get Polk and a 2028 seventh round pick. So Saints did like a late round pick swap 1 year to the next year to get him. And that might indicate that he's not a very talented guy, or that the Saints ended up making a move for somebody that's not going to be. I mean, this is a really talented guy. So I wanted to highlight what it was that stood out to me from a traits perspective that absolutely has a place in the New Orleans Saints offense. So at 6'1", 203 pounds, this is a player that is really, really physical at the catch point, does a very good job separating late, has late hands, and has some elite ball tracking and focus ability. That's where I want to start. Is the elite ball tracking and focus ability. Because I'm not just talking about ball tracking like him running down the sideline, looking over his shoulder and tracking the football into his hands. I'm talking about elite focus and ball tracking from the perspective of passes being hurled his way, the ball getting knocked up in the air, and him being the only one to get an eye on the football. He has several of those very impressive catches all throughout his Washington days. And a lot of times, like even if you look at the highlights of players, you see a whole lot of running wide open and getting these opportunities because wide receivers were schemed up, all that. You watch Ja'Lynn Polk's tape, not even his highlight reel, but you watch his tape, and what you're going to see is a lot of highlights that he does make in not so advantageous situations. A throw that was placed pretty well by Michael Penix Jr. in between the collapsing defenders in a cover 2 hole shot. Let me explain what a cover 2 hole shot is for those that don't know. A lot of times when you're the boundary receiver and you're facing a cover 2, which is the coverage that has 2 deep safeties, each one with the responsibility of covering one half of the field each. When you're lined up against your corner, that corner will only get so much depth, i.e. he'll only go so far back. And then the idea is to pass the player off, especially if he's playing zone, into that safety zone. But a lot of times there's a gap in between where the top of the cornerback zone is and the bottom of the safety zone is. That gap is called the hole, the cover 2 hole. And cover 2 hole shots are one of the prettiest balls that an NFL quarterback can throw, that a collegiate quarterback can throw. And Michael Penix Jr. during his Washington days was never afraid to attack those, especially when Ja'Lynn Polk was the guy on the boundary taking that he's taken that shot towards. And so he would consistently find areas in that, or space in that area, and either throttle down or create a little bit of late separation to be able to go out there and get these passes. But sometimes it would get tipped up in the air and he would be the only one with his eyes up. You could see the face mask, only one with his eyes up, tracking the football and then finding a way to get under it. And sometimes, in a couple of occasions, took those for touchdowns in the most unlikely of circumstances. The other part of the focus for me, too, is being able to have that focus in those cover 2-hole shots that we were just talking about, which is a place where you have a cornerback underneath you and a safety over the top of you that are going to collapse and meet you at the catch point. And you have to have focus to bring the ball in, bring that in, secure it, take the hit, and be able to hold on to the football. So it's the focus of bringing the ball in and in the ball security that takes place after that. He has several of those types of catches on his tape. You even get some of those down the back corner of the end zone as well, to where he's got to just know where he is. His spatial awareness is really strong, understanding where that corner boundary is, understanding where that pylon is, and being able to reel in the pass and get his foot in college, get his feet in the NFL, obviously, but getting his foot in college. All of that was there on his tape. I'm not talking about just watching his highlights. I was about going through his tape during especially his final year at Washington. And we saw a little bit of it too during his time with New England. What we saw more of, though, during his time in New England was making catches in tight windows. And some of that is the focus part, but that alone is a skill set that I think could be advantageous for New Orleans. You have a guy like Devaughn Vele who can make these big catches in the middle of the field, take that on physically. That's another guy that they traded for at the beginning during the preseason last year. He can make those catches in the middle of the field. He was a big part of the reason why Tyler Shuck and Kellen Moore and that offense were so efficient over the middle of the field, especially going from the Miami Dolphins game on, which is really where Devaughn Vele exploded a little bit. And then you look at Chris Olave, who is a deep threat, can run every route in the tree, who can create separation early in his routes, late in his routes at any time, and of course make catches down the sideline and has that world-class speed that can get you some wins down there too. And so what I think that Jalen Polk does really well in terms of his traits is that he rounds all of it out in a way that I think could be really, really beneficial for New Orleans. His contested catch ability adds to their opportunities to be able to not necessarily have to have a big window to throw into. His ability when it comes to that elite focus and ball tracking could help him get out of trouble, but also allows him to be able to be a deep level player as well, a third level player as well. And then his ability to create late separation was something that popped up on tape all the time. A lot of times we see wide receivers create separation either at the line of scrimmage or out of their break. Out of their break meaning once they get to the top of their route, making a decision about, hey, if they're running a post route, once the angle changes, that's the break. Once the angle changes to 90 degrees on an out route or an in route, right, which is kind of that 90 degree into the middle of the field or out towards the sideline, once that angle changes, that's the break, right? And so coming out of the break is a really common place where receivers will create separation because there's maybe some subtleness to their movement or some suddenness to their movement. Two different things there. Subtleness meaning like, hey, I'm going to give you a little bit of an idea that I'm going to go one way, but I'm really going to go the other way. So I'm being subtle about which direction I'm going. Suddenness meaning how quickly you can get going in that direction, right? And he does a very good job of those things. But one of my favorite things that he does is that he has the ability to get over the top of a corner and then control the game from there. And he can decelerate to create a little bit of like tightness with that corner and then accelerate at the last second so that he can get the separation that he needs to be able to get under the football. That's just understanding trajectory, that's understanding and having a focus on where the football is, knowing your body control, knowing how to utilize leverage against a corner. And then the other piece of late separation is sometimes being physical at the catch point and getting a little push to where you can get off as well. Now, again, I want to be clear. This is a guy that did not play football in all of 2025 with a shoulder injury. No one knows what if he's going to be in 2026. But if he pans out on the Saints, very, very non-risky at all investment, it could be a pretty nice tandem or trio rather between him, Vele, and Olave to build upon over the course of this offseason. So you love some Jalen Polk. There's some more Jalen Polk for you. Coming up next, I also want to discuss an underrated draft pick from 2025, Moliki Matavao, the tight end, who has a real big opportunity ahead of him. We got that coming up for you next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by our friends over at TurboTax. Doing taxes should not be a thing that takes over your life. And this year, TurboTax is making it easier than ever to handle your taxes and move on with your day by making it so that you don't have to handle your taxes at all in the first place. Yeah, you heard that right, because with TurboTax Full Service, you can hand your taxes off to a trusted local expert who will handle them for you start to finish without all the stress or guesswork. So instead of spending hours trying to fill out and find the right forms, you can meet with a local TurboTax expert in person or online, whichever you like, and they will handle everything for you and try to get you every deduction possible that they can find for you as well. And for a limited time, you can get your taxes done by a TurboTax update expert for just $150 all in. And if you didn't have your taxes filed with a TurboTax expert last year, just file by February 28th. So take those taxes off your table and get on with your life. Visit turbotax.com/local to book your appointment today. All right, family, as we continue to take a look at some of the don't forget about me candidates throughout the 2026 season, going into the 2026 season, I'm reminded of Moliki Matavao, the second-year tight end, going into 2026 and the big-time opportunity that's ahead of him, because he might get thrust into a pretty big contributing role in 2026, assuming things continue to pan out for him. We appreciate you very much, as always, for making us your first listen and being an everydayer here on the show. Don't forget to check out the Everydayer Club. Link is in the description, where you can get a hold of film studies like the one that'll come out later this week on Jalen Polk, as well as, of course, join our Discord server, get some conversations going on in there, and one-on-one texting where I can give you all the information that you need ahead of time. Make sure you check out the Locked On Saints Everydayer Club. You can find the $5 version, $15 version in the link in the description. So Matavao's a really interesting tight end. And listen, I want to lay it all out there. Like, we're talking about a guy who had 2 catches for 10 yards last year. Okay, I want to be very clear about who we're talking about. And I don't mean that as an insult to Moliki Matavao. I just think about that being a pretty good example of what his usage looked like last year, right? Didn't get a lot of opportunities. Did some things on special teams. Spent most of the year, though, on the practice squad and all. And so I think that while we're talking about what he did last year is, of course, of value, I think that looking back at what the Saints haven't necessarily tapped into yet is equally as valuable. So if we go back to his UCLA days, especially his final 2 seasons at UCLA, where he transitioned from being more of a blocker at Oregon to being a bit more of a pass catcher over the course of his time at UCLA, 13 game appearances back in 2023, and he reeled in, during that time, 14 receptions for 283 yards. So he was not a tight end that was consistently looked to in the short area. Like, he had some intermediate, some deep game to his game, averaged 21.8 yards per game, but 20.2 yards per reception. Do you understand how insane that is? 21.8 yards per game, 20.2 yards per reception. So this dude had 2 touchdowns, 283 yards. Do I hear a 28-3 somewhere? Is that right? 283? I must be reading that number wrong. And then you look at 2024, 41 receptions, 506 yards, almost had 504 there, 506 yards, and had 2 receiving touchdowns during that season. So he did turn into more of a receiving threat during his time with the UCLA Bruins. And so he started off as a strong blocker at Oregon, but then transitioned and had a bit more success in that area of the game. And if you think about where the Saints are when it comes to their tight end room, yeah, they've got Juwan Johnson right now, but Foster Moreau is on a contract year. Jack Stoll is on a contract year, or Foster Moreau's contract is set to void. Jack Stoll is on a contract year. And then you also have like guys like Mason Pline, who were on the free agent, who were on the practice squad and then got on injured reserve before the season began. And then, of course, Taysom Hill. All of those guys are effectively on their way out. Zaire Mitchell-Payton, I think, maybe has 1 more year left on his deal, so he could potentially be around. But the Saints don't have a big sort of plethora of tight ends all of a sudden, right? It felt like, remember during the season, it was like, man, they should have a lot of tight ends on their roster. Yeah, they still have they still have Zaire Mitchell-Payton for 26 and 27, his year 27 and 28 seasons. So, I mean, in that case, you've got Drayton Welsh, you've got Juwan Johnson, you've got Zaire Mitchell-Paden, you've got Moliki Matavao, and one of those guys was a draft pick by the New Orleans Saints. And it's not Juwan Johnson. It's Moliki Matavao. One of those guys was drafted by this present coaching staff. And it's not Zaire Mitchell-Paden, who was signed off of waivers by this present coaching staff. It was Moliki Matavao in the 7th round coming out of UCLA. So I do think that there's a big opportunity for him to potentially fit in. Now, I think the Saints are going to end up addressing tight end a couple of different ways. They could bring Foster Moreau back, which I think would be a wise decision. I mean, he was still on the float with Tyler Shuck during Crew of Pygmalion and all that, so real chance that he's still around, no doubt about it. And then you have the ability to be able to add more tight ends here. Dallas Goedert, somebody that Kellen Moore is familiar with, could potentially look for a reunion with Kellen Moore. David Njoku talked about hitting free agency and not going back to the Cleveland Browns. Good for him to avoid that situation. And so he could potentially be somebody that's of interest to New Orleans, but will be of interest to, 31 teams, 30 teams in addition to the Saints and the Browns. And I gave my thoughts on that on one of our All Access podcasts. But I do think that there's a good chance that even with the potential for adding some tight end talent, and don't forget, this year's draft class has some really talented tight ends as well. I'll run through some of those names here in just a moment. But there's a good chance here that Matavao is somebody that's going into his second year and one of only 3 tight ends that will have spent an entire season, right? Because Zaire Mitchell-Paden wasn't added until late in the year. One of 3 tight ends that have spent an entire season going into a second season. I think that could mean something. Now, does that mean that all of a sudden this 7th round pick out of UCLA is blowing the doors off in New Orleans and he's the next big thing at tight end and all that? No, it doesn't necessarily mean that. But Juwan Johnson, who just had a career year last year in Kellen Moore's offense, is a guy that was an undrafted wide receiver coming into the NFL in transition to tight end. Matavao, somebody that's been playing the position for some time, just kind of transitioned in terms of how he was being utilized between Oregon and UCLA. And so there is a viable path forward for him. This was one of the things that we talked about last year, was that with him, there were not going to be many opportunities in 2025. It just didn't make sense, right? There was Taysom Hill, there was Foster Moreau, there was Jack Stoll, there was Juwan Johnson. There were all these players. And then the Saints just kept adding tight ends and adding tight ends and adding tight ends all throughout the year. And then we all went, wow, how many tight ends did they need? That's exactly how it panned out. 2 catches for 10 yards. And both of those catches and all 10 of them yards came in one game up against the Tennessee Titans. The 2025 season went exactly like we thought it would for him. Now going into 2026, okay, this is when opportunity starts to land. Because you need that rookie year as a tight end to adjust. You have to learn the blocking. You have to learn the protections. You have to learn the run blocking part of the game. You have to learn the protections in the pass blocking side and the calls and changes and all these other things. There's so much you have to learn as a tight end because you do so much as a tight end. You don't just catch passes. You don't just block. You do a lot of everything, especially if you're also somebody that's contributing on special teams. And so now that he's settled and he knows the system, he knows the calls, he knows the checks, he knows the protections, this is an opportunity for him to get an even bigger role. And then you have really, really strong tight ends on the way. Max Clare out of Ohio State, Tanner Cosio coming out of Houston, Kenyon Sadiq coming out of Oregon, Eli Sowers coming out of Vanderbilt. There are so many good tight ends in this draft class, but they will need time too. So even if the Saints invest, Matavao still has a door open for a big opportunity in 2026. Coming up next, I'm going to give you a couple of names that didn't get combine invites and got snubbed, but that you need to remember. We got that coming up for you next as we wrap up today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. The Winter Games are officially here, and if you're doing anything like us, you're looking forward to all of the events you can only see on the world's biggest stage every 4 years, and getting in on all of that action over at FanDuel.com is the best way to do it. It just makes sense, right? Everything from medal counts to the individual events that you know and love. This is your angle into the sport that you care most about. FanDuel gives you more ways to connect with all of that action, whether it's the U.S. versus Canada, how many fights are going to break out in hockey. I'm just kidding. I don't know if they actually have that line, but they have things like, the U.S. is second right now in terms of odds for gold medal count, second for all medal counts as well. There's the drama of curling, the excitement of speed skating, all of that and much more. The Winter Games are on, and there's no better way to get in on them and follow along than with FanDuel. FanDuel, play your game today. You can visit FanDuel.com to get started. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. There are some players that did not get invites, at least not yet, to the NFL Scouting Combine. On the list that they published, 319 names. There are a few notable players that did not get invites to this time that I want to make sure you don't forget about. That's kind of the theme of today's episode. You clearly did not forget about Jalen Polk, so I wanted to make sure we came back to that for you. I don't want you to forget about Moliki Matavao and what's ahead for him. And I don't want you to forget about these select players as well, of those that were effectively snubbed opportunities going into the NFL Scouting Combine, which is at the end of this month. It's like February 23rd through March 3rd or something like that. We'll be there. We'll have it all covered for you here on Locked On Saints. So I'll start off with a running back that I talked about a lot going into the Senior Bowl, and that ran on the American team, which New Orleans Saints associate head coach and running back coach Joel Thomas spent time with and, coached. I just didn't want to use the word coach again. Running back Kaelon Black, coming out of Indiana, did not get a combine invite. Now, some other guys that we know and that we are excited to see, Jeremiah Love, Tyren Allen, Nicholas Singleton, who's dealing with that broken foot coming out of the Senior Bowl. We'll see. He might not be able to participate, but man, getting into those interviews and being able to update on the progress of his foot, I think is going to be big. We'll also see, other running backs like Jamari Taylor and others that will also be a part of that out of Virginia. But Kaelon Black out of Indiana was a guy that I was really excited to see. And he did not get a combine invite. But I don't want you to forget about him. He's a talented running back. He's somebody that runs very, very physically, that has sort of that bowling ball, Mark Ingram-like mentality as a runner. He's very, very physical. He is very, very strong. He is really tenacious, gritty, all of that. Measured in at 5'10", 210 pounds during his Senior Bowl measurements. 186 carries last year for 1,040 receiving yards and 10 rushing touchdowns on his way to a natty. So Kaelon Black might not end up being there in his own backyard at Indianapolis in the NFL Scouting Combine, but definitely a name to remember. How about wide receiver Cyrus Allen? Cyrus Allen's another one that's worth paying attention to. He's one of Lance Moore's guys, actually. Lance Moore reps him. Coming out of Cincinnati, not far away from Indianapolis either, not a very far jaunt away, yet not getting an invite. Somebody that was really, really impressive and perhaps one of the top wide receivers in terms of those that made an impression for themselves at the Senior Bowl this year. And so I think that he's a guy that will now get more opportunity and a little bit extra time on this to get out there and get ready for his Pro Bowl. That's going to be solid. Standing around 5'11", 6 foot, 5'10", somewhere in that range, 180-ish pounds. Good speed, good hands, really good concentration, high football IQ guy. Obviously, he picked Lance Moore to rep him. He's somebody to absolutely not forget about here, even though he did not get invited to the Scouting Combine. How about this one? This one was a big surprise to me. And that was wide receiver Tyren Montgomery. You'll probably remember me talking about Tyren Montgomery a whole lot during the Senior Bowl because he was ridiculously impressive during his time there, but also was the guy that just kind of like flew on the scene up out of nowhere, right? Had over 110 catches last season at John Carroll University, was a guy that was initially with LSU, was a basketball guy, moved over to football, has only been playing football for a couple of years. And this dude looked athletic, speedy, shifty, sudden, subtle, all of the things that you want to see from a wide receiver, and doesn't end up with a combine invite. And maybe it's the John Carroll University of it all. Maybe it's the, hey, he's only been playing football for so long of it all. In any of those cases, however, he is somebody that is absolutely worth getting a combine invite. I was shocked not to see him have a combine invite here going into this year. I mean, he was one of the biggest stories coming out of Mobile. He was one of the most skilled players coming out of Mobile. He was one of the guys that was making the most noise for himself during that time as well. I mean, he kind of did everything right. And so I was really, really surprised that the NFL and its focus on ratings didn't pay attention to the guy that a lot of people are really, really hoping to see going into this season. And so I don't know. I'm very, very surprised by his absence on this. I'm really, really surprised by, a guy with 119 receptions for over 1,500 yards and had 15 receiving touchdowns last year just kind of gets passed on in this situation. But you know what? I'm not gonna complain for him, right? The former Nicholls State guy. I'm not gonna complain for him. I'm gonna let him do his thing and go out there and make his own statement at his pro day and all that. But I was very, very surprised not to see him end up getting a nod. Quarterback, Trinidad Chambliss. I know that quarterback isn't really a thing that the Saints are super focused on this year. Also didn't get an invite. I don't want to go without saying that because that's probably the biggest question mark. But I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that he's doing this whole like, hey, can I go back to Ole Miss? Can I not go back to Ole Miss? It's getting kind of sad for Ole Miss at this point. But like all of that's going on. So that's probably why he didn't get an invite. So do keep that in mind as we move ahead here. That's the only reason why I haven't brought him up just yet. And then I'll wrap up here with a safety that I really, really liked. And I might be kind of alone on my own little island over here for this one. But Isaiah Nwokobia coming out of SMU. Physical, downhill safety, really good instincts, can sit over the top. And then like when, he's one of those guys where he gets ready to hit and then the ball pops up in the air, he's got his eyes on the ball immediately. Like just really has good instincts and really good reactionary pieces to his game that I think make him somebody worth watching and a big hitter as well. So I'd watch out for the SMU safety. Don't forget about him either. So Tyren Montgomery, Kaelon Black, Cyrus Allen, as well as Isaiah Nwokobia coming out of SMU. Those are the guys that maybe didn't get invites, but definitely don't deserve to be forgotten about. So keep an eye on those guys throughout the offseason. All right, family, time for a little bit of lanyard for the real ones that made it to this point in the episode. Today is the 1-year anniversary from the moment that the Saints hired, or actually yesterday. I'm recording this on the day. Sorry. It's yesterday was the 1-year anniversary of the day that the Saints turned around and hired Kellen Moore. I'll never forget that because it was also my birthday, right? Birthday's February 11th. They hired him on February 11th. It was great last year. And I think just looking over the course of the year, good job. Like everything's gone very, very well for Kellen Moore. It didn't start out that way, right? It was rocky to start, a 1-8 start, a 2-10 start at one point, and question marks about where things were headed at the quarterback position, QB battle, all that stuff. But they got through all of that. They weathered the storm just like Kellen Moore said they wanted to and said they were going to do. And now all of a sudden the hopes are so high here in New Orleans. Like it's a great carnival season right now because there's not a lot going on. Like last year's, floats were making fun of the Saints. We're making fun of Derek Carr. Remember the zombie Derek Carr float and all that other stuff? I think that was last year. It was either last year or the year before. But like now all of a sudden you have Saints players. I mean, you always have Saints players on floats, but like Drew Brees is coming back to ride in a parade. Tyler Shuck was the grand marshal of a parade. Cam Jordan, the grand marshal of a parade as well. And so like now you're seeing all of this again. And so it's been really cool to watch. And the job that this team has done and the job that Kellen Moore has done to just re-engage the community and reignite the passion of the fan base. Look no further than like the John O'Barnes show and where you can hear people call in, or like Hold the Mayo, you can hear people call in and talk about their passion for this team and the Pelicans and everything like that. Even though things aren't going with the Pelicans, fans are passionate. And a lot of that, especially on the Saints side, has to do, well, specifically on the Saints side, has to do with Kellen Moore and what the job is that he did and that this team did and coaching staff did in terms of reigniting the excitement around the team and re-engaging the community with the team. So really, really good things coming for the New Orleans Saints. Ideally, that's certainly what it feels like, and that's not bad for 1 year and counting under Kellen Moore. All right, family, coming up in tomorrow's episode, we'll take a look at the players that need a little bit of a bounce back going into 2026 and why it's a massive year for running back Kendre Miller. Got that coming up for you tomorrow. We appreciate you very much. As always, make this a part of your day, part of your routine for saying yes to me on the show. If you see me, please say hi. If you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, N-O-L-A. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you're living. Let me know how you're momming them. And trust you, that nation. I'll holla at you.